I was driving down a desolate stretch of road at dusk, the sun barely a smudge on the horizon. The orange and pink hues had faded, and shadows began to stretch across the empty two-lane highway. There was nothing around but endless fields of corn swaying in the breeze, their rustling creating an eerie symphony. I gripped the wheel, feeling that unease that comes from being alone in an unfamiliar place. I was already regretting my decision to take the back roads to save time. That's when I saw her. A young woman was standing at the edge of the road, her thumb extended in the classic hitchhiker pose. She had long, wild hair, and her clothes looked dusty, but she was beautiful in a haunting kind of way. I almost drove past her, but something in her eyes made me hit the brakes and decide to pull over. "Hey, thanks for stopping," she said, climbing in without hesitation. Her voice was low, almost musical, and she closed the door with a quiet click. I noticed her nails were dirty, like she had been clawing at something. "Where are you headed?" I asked. She tilted her head slightly as if thinking about it. "Anywhere," she replied, a smile spreading across her face. There was something unsettling about it, but I pushed the thought away. It was probably just my imagination playing tricks on me. The road ahead was darkening, the sky now a deep indigo. We rode in silence for a while. She didn't fidget or make small talk, and it made the air between us feel heavy. "You know, it's a long drive. You want to play a game?" she muttered towards me. I glanced at her. Her eyes reflected the light from the dashboard, giving them an unnatural glint. What kind of game?" "Truth or dare," she said, turning her body slightly to face me. I laughed uneasily. "Aren't we a little too old for truth or dare?" She shrugged. "It'll make the time pass faster. Besides, I'm not afraid of what the truth might reveal. Are you?" The question felt loaded, but I swallowed my fears and nodded. "Fine, truth." Her eyes locked onto mine. "Have you ever done something you're ashamed of? Something you'd never tell anyone?" The image of a fight I had years ago flashed through my mind. The guy's broken jaw, the emergency room. I shivered. "Yeah," I said softly. Her smile widened. "Interesting. Your turn." I decided to push back. "Truth or dare?" "Dare," she replied, her voice smooth. "Okay. I dare you to tell me what you're doing out here. Why you needed a ride." Her smile vanished. The air in the car grew cold, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. I was running. Running from someone. A cold dread wrapped around me. "Who?" Her eyes met mine, and they were hollow, empty. "From the last person who played this game with me. He wasn't very good at it." I pressed my foot harder on the gas pedal, hoping to outrun whatever weirdness I'd invited into my car. The cornfields blurred past, but the tension between us only grew thicker. "Your turn," she said. Her voice was suddenly louder, more demanding. "Truth or dare?" "Truth," I answered, my mouth dry. "Do you believe in ghosts?" I forced a laugh. "Not really. At least not until tonight." Her laughter was brittle, almost mocking. "Wrong answer. You should have said yes." Suddenly, the car's headlights flickered and the engine sputtered out of control, coughing like a dying animal. I pulled over to the side of the road, my heart hammering. The silence that followed was deafening. When I turned towards her, she was gone. The passenger seat was empty, but the door hadn't opened. It was as if she'd vanished into thin air. I scrambled out of the car, the night air frigid against my skin. I shouted her name, though I never even asked her what it was. There was no answer, only the sound of rustling corn and my own ragged breathing. Then I heard her voice, echoing in the fields. Truth or dare? I didn't wait to hear it again. I jumped back into my car, praying it would start. After a moment of whimpering turns of the key, the engine roared to life. I didn't look back, not even when her laughter followed me down the road. The game wasn't over. It was just past midnight, and the two-lane road I was driving down seemed to stretch on forever. My GPS had glitched out miles back, leaving me in the middle of nowhere with no signal. The road was lined with dense woods, their shadows reaching out under the faint moonlight. I was trying to ignore the creeping feeling of isolation when my headlights swept over a figure standing at the roadside. A man, somewhere in his 30s, was standing with his thumb out. He wore a flannel shirt and jeans, a backpack slung over one shoulder. He had a rugged look, the kind of guy you'd expect to find camping or hiking. I slowed down, my stomach twisting with indecision. I had always told myself to never pick up a hitchhiker, but the guy looked desperate, and in that moment, the thought of leaving him stranded felt wrong. Besides, he looked harmless. Maybe he was just lost like me. I pulled over, and the man jogged to the passenger side, opening the door with a grateful smile. Thanks so much for stopping, man. I've been out here for a while. Hey, no problem. Where are you headed? Just as far as you're going. Got turned around while I was hiking. I nodded and eased the car back onto the road. For a few minutes, we made awkward small talk. He told me about his supposed hiking trip, how he'd underestimated the terrain and ended up lost. His words sounded practiced, like he'd told the story many times before. But I tried to brush off the unease I felt, chalking it up to the nerves, and continued driving down the road. The conversation stalled, leaving only the hum of the engine and the rhythmic thump of the tires. I glanced at him out of the corner of my eye. He was staring straight ahead, his hands clenched tightly in his lap. His breathing seemed heavier than before. So, do you believe in fate? I swallowed, unsure how to respond. I guess so. Why? He turned towards me, and I noticed a strange gleam in his eyes. Because it was fate that brought us together tonight. A cold chill shot through me. What do you mean? His smile twisted into something dark, and he reached into his backpack. My heart raced as he pulled out a small, rusted hunting knife. The blade caught the moonlight, sending a shiver down my spine. Pull over, he said, his voice eerily calm. My mind raced, my options dwindling. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. Trying to stay composed, I said, "Please, take whatever you want, just don't hurt me." Pull over, he repeated, pressing the blade lightly against my side. The cold metal was enough to convince me. My hands trembled as I slowly guided the car to the shoulder of the road, gravel crunching under the tires. Turn off the engine. Now give me your phone. I handed it to him, my fingers shaking. He threw it out the window into the darkness. Get out of the car. I obeyed. Just in that moment, a miracle happened. In the distance, I saw flashing red and blue lights. My chest surged with hope as a patrol car emerged from around a bend, its headlights piercing the night. The hitchhiker noticed too, his eyes widening in fear. Stay cool, he hissed. Don't you dare run. But the cop had already noticed my car on the side of the road. The cruiser pulled over, and an officer stepped out, shining his flashlight toward us. "Everything all right here?" The cop called, his voice cutting through the tension. The hitchhiker tensed, but I summoned all the courage I had and screamed, "Help me, he's got a knife!" The officer's demeanor changed instantly. He drew his gun, aiming at the hitchhiker. "Drop the weapon and step out of the vehicle," he commanded. The hitchhiker cursed under his breath, his grip on the knife loosening for just a moment. I took the opportunity and elbowed him as hard as I could. The knife clattered to the floorboard, and he lunged for it, but the officer was already at the car door, yanking it open and dragging him outside. Within moments, backup arrived, and the hitchhiker was pinned to the ground, handcuffed and seething. I stumbled out of the car, my legs shaking so badly I could barely stand. One of the officers approached me. "You okay?" he asked, his voice kind but firm. I nodded, tears streaming down my face. "Thank you. I don't know what he would have done to me if I nodded, tears streaming down my face. "Thank you," I whispered. "I don't know what he would have done to me if you hadn't shown up." The cop glanced at the hitchhiker, who was being loaded into the back of a cruiser. "We've been looking for him. You're lucky, son. He's been terrorizing this area for weeks." Lucky. The word echoed in my head. I picked up a hitchhiker, and by some act of miracle, fate, God, whatever it was, I'd survived. The officer's lights faded into the night as they took him away, leaving me alone again on that dark, empty road, shaken, but thankful to be alive. The rain was coming down in sheets, hammering against the windshield and turning the winding mountain road into a slick, treacherous path. My wipers were on full blast, barely keeping up, and my knuckles had gone white from gripping the steering wheel too tightly. I'd taken this back route to avoid traffic, but now, in the middle of a storm, I was starting to regret the decision. The beam from my headlights illuminated something on the side of the road. A figure hunched against the rain, holding out his thumb. I had to squint to make sense of it. An old man, soaked through, wearing a tattered raincoat. His shoulder was hunched, and his face was hidden underneath his hood. I drove past, but guilt twisted in my stomach. The guy looked ancient, fragile even. He probably wouldn't even survive long enough out here in this storm. So against my better judgment, I slowed and pulled over, watching in the rearview mirror as he hobbled toward the car. The old man opened the passenger side door and climbed in, shivering. His raincoat dripped onto the floor mats, and he smelled of wet earth and something faintly metallic. He pulled back his hood, revealing a gaunt, deeply lined face. His face, though, had an unsettling intensity. "Thank you. I've been walking out here for hours." "No problem. Where are you headed?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, as if listening to something far away. "Anywhere you're going." I forced a smile and started driving again. The road twisted and turned, lined on either side by dense, dark trees. The old man sat stiffly, his hands resting on his knees, his breathing coming in shallow, uneven wheezes. "So, what were you doing out here in this weather?" He turned his head slowly to look at me. His gaze was unsettling, a pale blue that seemed to peer right through me. "Just trying to get home," he said. I nodded and focused on the road. The rain was easing slightly, but the fog now was rolling in, thick and heavy. It wrapped around the car, making everything outside look ghostly. I kept driving, the old man's presence pressing heavily on me. "Strange weather tonight," he said, trying to break the silence. His voice had a peculiar quality to it, like the words were echoing from somewhere deep inside. Brings things out of hiding. I glanced at him, my grip tightening on the steering wheel. What do you mean by that? He didn't respond, just kept staring straight ahead. The temperature in the car felt like it had dropped 10 degrees, and I found myself shivering. I adjusted the heater, but it made no difference. The fog outside seemed almost alive, swirling in unnatural patterns. Stop, he said abruptly, his voice cutting through the noise of the rain. What? Stop the car. Against every instinct, I eased onto the brakes, the tires skidding slightly on the wet asphalt. We came to a stop on the side of the road, and the old man leaned forward, pressing his forehead against the cold window. His breath fogged up the glass. This is where I get out. Out? We're in the middle of nowhere. His thin, cracked lips twisted into a humorless smile. I was never really going anywhere. Before I could say anything, he pushed the door open and stepped out into the fog. I blinked in disbelief. He moved with a strange swiftness, disappearing into the swirling mist. For a moment, I just sat there, dumbfounded. I finally got out, the cold rain soaking me in seconds. Hey! Where are you going? I shouted. There was no reply, just the sound of the rain and the whisper of the wind. The road was empty, the fog thick as ever. It was like he had vanished into thin air. I stood there for a few moments, feeling foolish and more than a little spooked. I climbed back into the car and closed the door. As I tried to steady my breathing, something caught my eye. On the passenger seat, where the old man had sat, was a small, dark stain, like rusty water or old blood. I swallowed hard. I reached over to see what it was and touched the stain, only to jerk my hand back. It was icy cold. The engine roared to life, and I sped off, the headlights slicing through the fog. I drove faster than I should have, desperate to leave that spot behind. But as I glanced in the rearview mirror, I swore I saw a shadowy figure standing by the roadside, watching me. When I looked up again, it was gone, swallowed by the mist.